There is a man from the year 400 AD whose ideas are still shaping your life today. You probably have not heard much about him. He did not lead an army. He did not discover a continent. He sat in North Africa and wrote books. But those books became the intellectual backbone of the Catholic Church, which shaped European civilization for over 1,000 years, and whose logic still echoes in how modern institutions teach people to think about authority, guilt, and obedience. His name was Augustine, and once you understand what he actually argued, you will start seeing versions of it everywhere. To understand Augustine, you first need to understand the crisis he was responding to. For decades, the Roman Empire had been officially Christian. Emperors had converted, churches had been built, Christianity was the law of the land, and Christians believed that this meant God's kingdom was finally arriving on earth. Then, in 410 AD, Rome was sacked. Barbarians poured through the gates of the Eternal City. People were killed, temples were looted, and the symbolic center of the Western world was shattered. This was a crisis of faith on a massive scale. Some people said, "See, this happened because Rome became Christian. The old gods protected Rome for centuries. Now that you have abandoned them, they have abandoned you." Others said, "Christianity teaches mercy and forgiveness, but that is not how the world actually works. A religion of kindness cannot protect an empire." The Catholic Church needed an answer, and Augustine gave them one. But the answer he gave was not what most people expected. Augustine's solution was to remove the Church from history entirely. Every powerful person before him had made the same move. They conquered something, and then they declared that all of history had been leading to this moment. Augustine did something different. He said, "None of that. The Church is not a political institution that rises and falls with empires. The Church exists outside of history. It represents God on earth, and no military defeat can touch it. Rome can be sacked, emperors can die, but the Church will always be the Church." To explain this, he wrote one of the most influential books in the history of the Western world, The City of God. In it, he described two cities. One is Rome, the earthly city, the city of power, greed, and pride. The other is Jerusalem, the heavenly city, the city of God, humility, and spiritual purity. The Church belongs to Jerusalem. Whatever happens in Rome is irrelevant. This was brilliant from a power perspective. It meant the Church could never lose. No matter what happened politically, the Church could always say, "We are not of this world. Our victories are spiritual. Our failures are lessons. You cannot touch us with history." But Augustine went much further than just repositioning the Church. He wrote a famous memoir called The Confessions, which is often called the first authentic autobiography in world history. In it, he tells the story of his youth, his sins, his long road to conversion, and in retelling it, he constructs a specific theory of human nature that became the foundation of Catholic doctrine. The core of that theory is this: we are not just flawed, we are fundamentally, irreparably bent toward evil, not because someone tricked us into it, but because it is our nature. He retells the story of Adam and Eve not as a cautionary tale about being deceived, but as proof that humans chose evil on purpose, because evil feels good. He writes about stealing pears as a child, not because he was hungry, not because he needed them. He stole them because he enjoyed sinning. The pleasure was in the wrongness itself. And then he goes further. Adam, he says, was not deceived by Eve. He chose to join her in sin because he loved her. And that love, that completely human, completely understandable bond between two people, that is what doomed the entire human race. Love, Augustine argues, can only lead you away from God. The only true love is the love of God, which means obedience to God. If you are born in sin and all your instincts lead toward sin, then your own curiosity is a trap, your own judgment is a trick, your own feelings are evidence of your corruption. The only safe thing to do is not to act on any of it. Obey God, which means obey the church. Be humble, which means deny yourself. Do nothing that comes from your own will. He even argues this about a famous Roman heroine named Lucretia, who killed herself after being assaulted because she could not bear the shame. Romans considered her a hero. Augustine says no, she killed herself out of pride. A true Christian woman would have lived, because murder is a greater sin than what was done to her. Here is why this matters far beyond the history of the Church. Augustine was not writing for ordinary people. At this point in history, most people could not read. He was writing for the priests. He was creating a rhetorical manual, a set of arguments they could deploy in any situation to maintain the authority of the Church and the obedience of the population. The logic is elegant and almost impossible to escape from inside. You are born sinful. Even your desire to question the system is evidence of your sinfulness. The only escape from your nature is to surrender to God, which means surrendering to the Church. If you suffer, it is because you have sinned. If you want things to change, that wanting is pride. The teacher in our source material draws a direct line between Augustine's logic and the logic of communism. Both ask you to suffer now for a promised paradise later. Both say that individual desire and judgment are obstacles to the greater good. Both use guilt to enforce compliance. This is not an accident. It is the same deep structure of power, dressed in different clothes across different centuries. Augustine was a genius, there is no question about it. He was a brilliant writer, a sophisticated thinker, and he understood rhetoric the way a master carpenter understands wood. But genius in the service of control is still control. For roughly 1,000 years in Europe, the ideas Augustine constructed made it dangerous to be curious, to question, to imagine, to love anything that was not first filtered through the Church. Historians call this period the Dark Ages, and while that name oversimplifies things, it captures something real, a long pause in the kind of social innovation, debate, and creativity that makes civilizations grow. What ended it was not a battle or a plague, it was ideas. Ideas about love, about the human will, about beauty, about what God might actually want from us. One of those ideas came from a poet in Florence named Dante, and that is the next chapter. If you want to understand how the world escaped Augustine's shadow,